in your head, yeah?
Okay, great.
Okay. Okay, 5, 4.
Good evening and welcome to New York Symposium with Diane Sayre. Diane Sayre is a candidate, independent candidate for the United States Senate running against the infamous Chuck Schumer, now the head of the United States Senate committee. And what we want to do tonight is to take up a topic that we began discussing actually last week. Last week when we were here, we were doing something over the arc of the Martin Luther King weekend, and there were 3 events that occurred, all of which were intended to discuss and give people an idea of how to think about how to address the circumstance in which the Constitution of our nation is not only threatened, but has been challenged. If you saw the inauguration, you know that the 26,000 National Guardsmen and 14,000 other law enforcement and Department of Defense personnel that deployed at the Biden-Harris presidential election, which is a force about the same size as all of the military forces we have deployed in Germany, was a sort of massive and impressive display of weakness, particularly mental weakness. You had a return of the sort of Obama ancient regime met with kind of, shall we say, not exactly roaring enthusiasm. People who understand that the issues now concerning the policy matters that will come up in this regime are dire. But the most important issue that was posed is, of course, the one that was suppressed as a result of the events of January 6th, namely the character of the American electoral process and the attempt to have a discussion, constitutionally mandated discussion, actually, at the Capitol about that matter. You had a sitting president who was asserting that he believed, and many other people of his supporters believed, the election had been stolen. And that matter was to be discussed and disputed in the Congress of the United States. That's why people had assembled. And the hundreds of thousands of people that did come into Washington and the millions of people that were there and assembled by means of media expected that discussion. That discussion was, of course, disrupted with the tragic deaths of several people. And then something which was clearly pre-planned was then said to have been instigated by the President of the United States. And then from there on, we were off to the races. No more discussion about the actual electoral process. What we're here to do tonight is to discuss that matter, and that matter from several standpoints. So we've assembled a panel today, again, a symposium, as we've said, and that's, of course, the purpose of this series. And that symposium is going to involve a series of people, and we're going to introduce them now. We have with us today Steve Freeman and Lynn Landis, both of whom are, I would say, ballot experts, or we can tell them election experts, who have been working on this matter for well over 2 decades. And they're going to have certain things to say. We also have with us Bill Binney. I think everybody knows Bill, who has been paying any attention to what we've been doing and what Diane's been doing. He is former a sort of technical director for the National Security Agency, was there for 30 years and is most famous for his work in the creation of the thin thread surveillance system. And of course, he's been with various of us from the LaRouche organization on various platforms at different times. We got Derrick Gibson also, who is an independent candidate for governor. And he's with us. He's been doing a lot of things with Diane, and he and Diane are very concerned about how and in what way a plan could be proposed to deal with the problems of the prospective fraud going forward to be expected in New York State. And then finally, Diane Sayre, who is the fundamentally, this, I would say, the chairman of the symposium that you're going to hear now. So Diane, why don't you get us started?
Great, thanks a lot. Well, I really wanted, after hearing the Schiller Institute's seminars on the question of truth in elections, I thought, given that I am a candidate for Senate, and as Dennis mentioned, Derrick Gibson is also a candidate for governor, I would like to have my vote counted. And I think we should take a pilot project, the state of New York, to actually fight this through and get it done really in the next few months, because there's the mayoral race in 2021, which is New York City, which is very important in the United States. Now, I think what you just went through, Dennis, at the beginning, the fact that we needed 40,000 people to quote unquote, protect the inauguration of President Joe Biden also has to do with the fact that they know that the majority of the American population did not vote for him. And we don't know the full extent of the fraud in this election, but the people who pulled it off might have some idea, which might explain why they went into such an extraordinary deployment. This really should never be seen in the United States of America. Now, there's going to be a fight. Biden has come in and done things like returned us immediately to the Paris Accords, which have nothing to do with the environment, if you care about that, but is simply a banker's dictatorship where they're going to actually give industrial firms money, which they will pay farmers to take their food out of production. I mean, really hideous policies. Now, if you want to stop these policies, if you think we should actually be working on things like eradicating poverty worldwide, how do you do it? Normally in the United States, you would say, well, we go to the Congress, we go to the town hall meetings, and presumably the congressmen have to worry about being elected every 2 years. So if a group of people show up with their pitchforks, they would listen. However, if the Congress knows that Hollywood, Wall Street, the FBI, the CIA, and God knows what else is going to make sure that they don't lose their seat, then they really don't have to listen to you. So it's not merely a matter of candidates having a shot or having a free election. It's the fabric of our democratic republic, that the people have to have a voice, and the representative should not be in a Teflon shield protected from what the needs of the population are. So I think it's very urgent, as part of the fight for all of the policies, which we're not going to wait until we have fair elections. But if we don't get this thing straightened out, then there will not be a government that people can have confidence in. And then the whole question of the consent of the governed falls on its face. So I don't want to say more about this now, because the people we have here know a lot more about this than I do. And I'm actually interested in learning from them, you know, what are the things to look for? What should we be doing? What have they run across in other cases? What can states do, etc. So that's all I have to say to start.
Okay, thanks a lot. We'll start now with Steve Freeman. He's an author, founder, and director of the Election Integrity Forum, author of Was the 2004 Presidential Election Stolen? Exit Polls, Election Fraud, and the Official Count. So, Steve? I think you might be muted.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, we got you. We can hear you now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Dennis. Right. What we can do, I mean, that's a thorny issue. I mean, I'm a little bit more at ease in kind of motivating the subject, and most people in America, at least until this November, had some faith in our election system. And in fact, when Lynn and I first started talking about this in 2004, you would go to most audiences and they would say, you know, what do you mean elections not reliable? Everybody reports it. How could it possibly be off? If it was off, every newspaper in the country would report it. Why would the Democrats go along with it? They had 10,000 lawyers. Why wouldn't they have stopped it? So for most audiences, it was a matter of persuading them of something that they'd never considered. They learned the civics version of how things work in high school, and that's all they hear in the newspapers. So I want to disabuse people of that idea, first of all, and provide the evidence. And even this time around, we've had the mainstream media telling us for months how this was the most secure election in history. And that is just unreasonable. And the one thing they charge, which was supposedly the Russian interference in the 2016 election was almost on the face of it ludicrous. So the one thing they say is corrupt was one of the few things that, was not a factor. Okay, so about elections. I mean, there's 2 points, and we discussed this on Monday, and Diane's points about all these soldiers in the Capitol trying to keep order illustrates the second point about why we need honest elections. Okay, the first point is obviously we want to be able to choose our representatives, of course. And if we can't choose our representatives, we wind up with representatives who are completely unresponsive to our interests and just, unscrupulous careerists. And we wind up with a situation which we have where barely 1 in 10 Americans have any faith in Congress. I mean, that's just incompatible with the idea of a democratic republic. I mean, that would be sort of outrageous even in a theocracy or some other system. So 10% of people supporting Congress is just on the face of it unacceptable. And now we have a situation where half the country doesn't even believe that, at least half the country doesn't believe Biden was elected. If you throw in all the people who suspect that the Democratic primaries were in some way rigged, then, I mean, who really supported this ticket of Biden and Harris? Okay, so what are some of the problems with the election system? I mean, the first problem is basic. I mean, the overarching problem is the idea of transparency. That it's not enough to say that the votes are counted honestly. It's not even enough to count them honestly. You have to do it in such a way that I'm going to be able to see for myself and everyone else can see for themselves that it's counted honestly. There's a lot at stake in an election, right? So, people are going to be mistrustful. And an election system is actually not based on trust. It can't be. It has to be based on transparency, that you can actually see for yourself that the results are what is reported. So how is our system not transparent? Well, this begins early. Lynn will have even a different take on it, that it begins much earlier. But for me, it went really awry with the bringing in of the machines. So you have vote counting machines in the 1960s, and then especially electronic voting in 2002, and you wind up with a situation where people push a button, something happens within a computer system, and you're told the result. And what they've said, we actually had a system where there was absolute no possibility of verification. That was called the direct record electronic system. That has, for the most part, been terminated, and supposedly there's a paper trail, but in fact, that paper trail you're still dependent on proprietary software for the manufacture of that trail, and in fact, it's never looked at. They say the vote is counted and recounted, but what happens is somebody feeds a stack of ballots in through a machine, a number comes out. When they recount it, they stick the same stack of papers through the same machine, and thus verifying neither the machine nor the ballots. We have, I mean, there's a, when we're told that there's been no proof of election fraud. And we're told that all the time. I mean, that is really wrong on two counts. First of all, there's been many, many, many documented instances of election fraud. I mean, they're not so widely available. In fact, Google just made a decision that they were pulling down all videos which claim election fraud, not just in the past election, not just of that perhaps Biden didn't win legitimately, but all U.S. elections. So all those stories are being hidden from the public. Beyond that, it's actually quite difficult to prove fraud because, again, everything happens in a black box. There's a great an early book on the subject was called Black Box Voting, and they made some films too. And there's they show the inherent difficulty of proving it, and the fact that in some cases, for example, this last election, it may not have been proven in beyond a shadow of a doubt, but that's because it's impossible to do so, at least quickly, when you don't have access to the data. So we have these machines that prevent looking at it. There's not a human count. In addition to that, there are problems with observation. In the last election, systematically, there's supposed to be credentialed observers, or there are credentialed observers who are supposedly have a right to observe all ballot actions. And they were systematically prevented in many of the swing states from observing things. There's a couple more things, but the third very big one that I want to mention is censorship. That the political establishment has tried to instill trust in the system, basically by insisting that it was safe and preventing anyone from saying otherwise, and now deplatforming anyone who says that otherwise, and then destroying the platforms, Parler, where people can still say otherwise. So we have, from beginning to end, a lack of transparency. If we were going to change things, and technologically, it is very simple to have clean elections. You would think it's so difficult because we haven't had one this century and maybe before. It's supposedly this incredibly difficult thing to do, but it's incredibly easy. All we have to do is what actual democracies do, what they do around the world. You have in Europe, in Africa, and South America, countries that want to have a transparent election, and not just political elections, anything from shop steward to your condominium association. You have an open, transparent process. So there's a couple things that Lynn and I laid out, and we're asking people to sign a petition for it. And one of these is in-person voting at the polls on election day. People they claim to like the idea of being able to vote early, vote from the comfort of their home, mail it in. But there's a reason for voting at the polls on election day, and that is to ensure a clean chain of custody, that everything is there out in the open. Plus, you have an ability to verify the results with election exit polls. A second big thing are hand-counted paper ballots filled out in ink. You're not dependent on a voting machine company, on having to trust a voting machine company. Of all the things that we should be trusting, that is the absolute last. And yet that's what they're saying. You have to trust them. If you have paper ballots filled out in ink, it's not a matter of trust. It's a matter of transparency. Everybody can see for themselves the results. Third is that poll watchers are there to represent all parties and candidates. They're entitled for a full view of the process. Most countries around the world allow international observers. Pretty much all democracies around the world allow it. The US doesn't. Ballots cast in secure boxes in full view, unbroken chain of custody. A few other things then are for hand counts of all ballots at the local polling place. Not a central counting facility where something could happen in the transport, new ballots inserted, ballots lost, but actual counts at the polling place immediately upon close of voting with observers present. And then beyond that, just posting the tallies immediately on doors and online. And then you have election results that are comprised by the sum of the tallies, not some media consortium calling it for someone, or the candidates themselves calling it, or conceding. We had an issue in 2004 where John Kerry promised that every vote would be counted. And yet, despite massive uncertainty, he conceded that very evening while people were still online to vote in Ohio, a state which would have swung the election. So technologically easy, but politically, this is a real challenge. I mean, every politician, either directly or indirectly, owes their career to this system. So asking them to change the system, well, it hasn't happened, and it's not going to happen unless they somehow can be forced to change it. As candidates, Diane, you'll have, and Derrick, you'll have standing to challenge it. And maybe you can make a difference that way, but it's a tremendous challenge, and we're not going to solve that problem here this evening.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. We're going to go to Lynn Landis. Lynn is the publisher of the Landis Report, and she has a piece, which I believe is her latest piece, maybe not now, but the last one we had was called Protocol for Honest Elections. She was also with us on Monday. So Lynn, go right ahead. We're happy to have you with us here.
Well, thank you, Dennis. And I do want to respond to what we can do, what people can do, and what candidates can do, specifically Diane and other candidates, because you do have standing, and you're being asked to run in a system that doesn't allow you to observe the process. And, back in 2004, actually, I filed a lawsuit against the city, state, and federal government. And I challenged the non-transparency, the constitutionality of the voting machines and absentee voting. And I appealed it to the Court of Appeals and to the Supreme Court, and of course they didn't take it. But I think it was because it was me. I think that you should challenge legally, constitutionally, the voting machines, the mail-in voting, and you might not want to challenge the absentee voting, but they have instituted a process that is a complete trap. I mean, this is just walking into a setup, and no one should have to do that. And really, I don't know anyone who has challenged the legality of the voting machines as a non-transparent system that does not allow for any meaningful observation other than myself. And so I was one person, one unknown person. What I did got no attention. But I really think people should look at that again, all candidates, and you might even be able to get a class action lawsuit. But this is, in my lawsuit and on my website, if you go to lynnlandis.com, then you'll find I have a voting integrity website that you can see, and then you can read all about it and read my my legal challenge. And in case law, you have there are two standards for voting integrity. One is that qualified voters have the right to vote, and that they have the right to have their votes counted properly. And those are the two standards. And upon these standards, they have codified the role of the federal observer. So the federal observer would go in, generally speaking, to southern states that have been accused of, racism and denying voter rights. But they didn't really have anything to watch, particularly when it came to the voting machines. So you just had a facade of democracy and transparency without it really taking place. And in fact, Craig Donsanto, who for 30 to 40 years was the head of the Department of Justice's election integrity unit, did say that if you did it right, no one would ever know. He admitted that. And he wrote a pamphlet that was a pamphlet basically giving guidance on how not to find vote fraud. So that's my first piece of advice, is everyone running for office should be challenging these unconstitutional, non-transparent voting systems every time they have a chance. They should do that, because otherwise this is just a fool's errand. And this has to be made really clear. And then the second thing people can do is just set a different tone, because we live in an age of convenience, and everyone wants things convenient. We have to change the tone of voting from one of convenience to one of sacred right. This is a sacred honor, a duty, a right, and it's not something to be cheapened. So it's really important that people show up, and not only for the voting, but for registration. That's really important. That's not to say that, let's say, registration officials couldn't, go to people's homes if they're disabled, or go to nursing homes and register them. But they've got to see that that person actually exists. And the same thing with voting. So with registration and voting, those are very much the same thing. So we have to change that dynamic. And then the third thing is, and this was brought up to today from someone else, and she was making this comment, whose name it just slips my mind, but Leah, who was a guest at the last, her last name slips my mind, but she said something to me today about, this is really has to be a local fight. And I was thinking about it, and then I thought, well, pretty much as local as it gets for voting is at the county level, I think. And so we need county commissioners, and in the state of Pennsylvania, most counties are very conservative, and we need those county commissioners to take the same attitude that many of the sheriffs in these blue states have taken, where they have said, I am not going to enforce what I believe are unconstitutional rights. So these county commissioners, I think the citizens and groups like ours have to speak to them and say to them, there is no constitutional reason that you should be using a system. And this includes, again, not only the voting machines, but also the mail-in voting, using that as part of your election process, because that breaks the chain of custody. There is no transparency to these processes, and therefore there is no reason to trust in the results. If there's no transparency, there can be no trust. So I really think that our target for change may be more successful at the county level, than at the state and federal level. In all of that, I think that it's also important for the public to understand our elections, for all practical purposes, are illegal. They're unconstitutional. They've been privatized, and they just, now what we have is a president who many of us clearly believe was not elected. And even if he was, it's now become a matter of faith, not facts. And that's just completely runs contrary to a democratic process.
Thank you very much, Lynn. As I introduce Bill Binney to everybody who doesn't know him, I want to just refer to an article that appeared in many different locations today, but this was the version that was in the Hill publication, which is published down in Washington, D.C. And it quotes from former FBI Director James Comey. It says, former FBI Director James Comey said in an interview published Thursday that the Republican Party must, quote, be burned to the ground, end quote, before it can rebuild now that former President Trump's term in the Oval Office has ended. Comey told Australia's ABC 730 news program that the GOP, quote, doesn't stand for anything that is valuable to our country. Quote, it doesn't stand for anything that is other than a cult of personality around a man who is a demagogue and a liar. The longtime Republican, who now describes himself as an independent, told the news outlet that, quote, the Republican Party has to be burned to the ground in some form or fashion. Now, some of us recognize that the FBI, the idea for the former head of the FBI to be saying that, especially after his interactions starting in January of 2017 with President Trump, is rather intriguing. And as Bill Binney has pointed out before, the FBI has access to a certain database run by the NSA. Without saying more about it, let me just introduce Bill, who is well known to people who followed the Snowden affair and other affairs around his own cases. That is Binney and Kirk Wiebe and others, Ed Loomis, okay, and Diane Rourke, and Tom Drake. Okay, got everybody. Knew I had to get everybody there. So, Bill, you go right ahead and let us know how you respond to what you've heard and what you think about the process that we just underwent in the country. You're muted. You're muted. Okay.
First, let me address Comey.
Yes.
I look at he is a guy that I personally believe belongs in jail. I mean, he has done so many crimes, it's not funny, but I can see. From lying to Congress, lying, and just basically ignoring the law and letting certain people in the Department of Just Us get by without being charged with crimes. And he's covered up all kinds of crimes, all kinds of things, and also participated in that signing the affidavits going forward to the FISA court for the Steele document, which he knew was false. Also, they knew that the Goose for Tomb data and all that was also formulated by people probably in the CIA, and I think I know where there. But he was a part of that charade, and he knew it from the beginning. And they took the whole country through that. And we had forensic proof that was the case. It was very clear to us that the DNC data was downloaded locally by someone inside the DNC, because the evidence was in the last modified times of the FAT file transfer format to a thumb drive or a CD-ROM that was evident in the material published by WikiLeaks. So that said that they got the data from a thumb drive or a CD-ROM. So it meant it was physically transported before they got it. That said, it was not a hack. A hack would not show that property. The Podesta emails were a hack, and they did not show the FAT file properties as published by WikiLeaks. Clearly, that was the case. But the courts would not let that testify. He wouldn't let me testify. So, I just thought that the courts are in on this too. Earlier this year, we passed out to all the secretaries of states of the United States, all 50 of them, plus Guam and Puerto Rico and a couple others. I can't remember the territories. But we were in there saying that we had a way of validating and verifying the vote in your state, counties, and what have you, and across the entire country. and we'd be glad to talk to you about it. We heard back from 0 of them. None answered at all. They weren't even interested. I mean, we were volunteering to tell them stuff, but they didn't even want to hear it. So what that told me, very simply put, they're all in it. They're all in it, taking advantage and manipulating it the way they want. And yeah, they're probably coordinating it. You take this seat this year, we'll take this one that year, you know, something like that, a trade-off. This entire system is so corrupt, it's just not funny. I mean, where else do you get ballots mailed in a suitcase? You know, coming out from under a table after you throw out all the witnesses. I mean, where does that happen? Well, it happens in banana republics. And I'm here to tell you our country is now the United Banana Republic States. We are the biggest and largest banana republic in the world. I mean, this is pathetic. I mean, you had people mailing and trucking ballots in from New York State into Pennsylvania so they can stuff them in. That's why so many counties came out with more than 100% of their registered voters voting. But nobody went through to check them to validate how many there were, who they were, and whether or not they were double voting, triple voting, quadruple voting, dead people voted. I mean, in Georgia alone, we found 1,911,451 people with the same birth date of 1 January. Now, come on. That means that 730 million people live in Georgia to get that population distribution, roughly. That's just the mathematical approach to it. What it says very simply is these 1,911,000 votes may or may not be right, they may or not be valid, but you need to look at them. They're questionable because of that birth date. And as you go through them, you validate them and say yes or no, and you do an audit of them and you get an honest result. You don't just accept corrupt fraud, which is what's been happening here. The Supreme Court did it. I was amazed at them. I mean, even the Texas and all the states contesting it because their voters were disenfranchised by the corruption in other states. I mean, that's true too. They didn't allow them standing. I mean, that seemed to me to be the basic issue and the fundamental principles of the Supreme Court and all the federal courts was to handle any question of constitutionality. They're all swearing an oath to the Constitution and they're all violating. So as far as I'm concerned, the entire district of corruption needs to be fired. All of them. If we can do that, that's what I do. And I'm a advocate of Article 5 of the Constitution, where we have a separate states constitutional convention and keep everybody in Washington out of it. And then all we need is 34 states, I believe, to get it going. I think there's 30 of them that are a republic. We need 4 more. Then we have a constitutional convention. We fire everybody in Washington and redefine how we have our elections. I advocate we do have certain criteria and put people in the entire country together, then do a random selection from it. Then it'll be a true public service like we do, jury duty. I mean, otherwise, and then you would get rid of political parties. You wouldn't have this corruption that's built into these parties. That's so obvious. At any rate, the idea of how to validate voters and validate voting and control one person, one vote, and know that they're a legal vote is a relatively trivial issue for us. It's trivial from a data set, a data process. All we'd have to do is take the registered voters from all the states, all the telephone books around the country, all the addresses and names of all the people in the fire company lists and the DMV lists and the Social Security list for the dead people and all that, and just merge it all and back it all together, and then we'll know exactly who's where or who says where they are, and that when they come in, they can't vote in multiple counties because we can pick them up as they do it. What I was proposing to them, but didn't get to discuss to these guys, was that we would have an online system that would by the time they register to vote at the polling place, or that they pick up a vote from a mailing thing, we could look at that data on that ballot, or look at that person and see what they input in the data at the polling place and verify them within 2 seconds. And that would be do that countrywide, because then you can pick them out in multiple states if they try to vote in different states or multiple counties or wherever. They cannot vote, it would be a unified system for the entire country. That way no one could vote in more than one place. And that's a trivial thing to do. I mean, the things I did before and when I was working in different agencies, shall we say, was to do tens of billions of indexing of tens of billions of things against trillions and trillions of transactions. This is trivial. We only have 330 million people, 250 some million registered voters, you know, or people of voting age. This is a fundamentally trivial problem. All we have to do is have the will to do it.
Okay, very good. So Derrick, I think you're back with us. You're a candidate. You may want to say a little bit more, Derrick, about what your own, shall we say, experience was and is thinking about the idea of running as an independent for governor in New York, and also your experience with the Trump campaign itself. But whatever else you'd like to say in response to what you've heard. Muted. You're muted.
Do it.
Okay.
So thank you. I am an independent Republican candidate for the governorship of New York State, and I'm very interested in having integrity in our election and a trusted system, like I heard Binney speak of. It's the only way we're going to be able to gain the trust of the people. There are so many people that don't trust the system anymore. People speaking about not ever voting again. So the only way we're going to get the people back with the trust is to enact some type of system that Bill is speaking of, which is, I've been doing a little research on it since he's been speaking about it for a while, and it's a good system. I think it's viable to get put in place. But what we must do at this point, we so far gone, is we must get, concentrate on the legislature getting patriots elected so we can enact these things, get them in place. I think that's the only way we're going to be able to bring the current system down and install voter integrity, voter ID, fingerprint voting, or whatever else we need to do to make sure that these elections are fairly done and just take it from there. But from my point of view, I man the polls in New York State, in Manhattan, and I've seen ballot boxes up, and I've seen ballots filled out and handed to the elderly people when they come in to just put in a machine and vote. I witnessed that back in 2016 election. So I know we have a lot of fraud. I witnessed it firsthand this go around. I was in Georgia, on a business in Georgia, so I was in Georgia, and I witnessed some young ladies going around in this vehicle and to the homeless camps and paying $5 to $20 to get their information so they can register them to vote and vote for them. And I did record that, but I got no feedback from the GBI in Georgia nor Brian Kemp, so I sent it to him several times. And so it's a lot of fraud. It's not, when we say it's fraud out there, it's not a conspiracy theorist. I have actually witnessed it, put my eyes on this and seen the voter fraud. And not only that, through my business, young lady worked for the board of election. She came up and she was bragging. She said, we got y'all biting in. I said, what do you mean you got us biting in? Oh, we did. We had to do. You know, we cheated. She worked for the Georgia Board of Election. I have a name. She gave me her phone number. I won't release that. But she said, we fixed it so Biden will automatically win. She said, you know, he didn't really win, but we fixed it like that. And this comes from a person, official that works for the Board of Election in Georgia. I mean, that's how rampant it is and how bold about it. She said, I don't like Biden. I actually wanted Trump to win myself, but she said, it's just something that we do. You know, they instruct us to do that, so we did it. So, Bill, we do need to get, what I want to do is get a synopsis from you, and I want to get it. I know someone in the New York State legislature. I want them to take a look at it and see if we get you in front of the legislative system and describe what you have in mind, and that way we can push it into the state of New York. I'm aware that you sent it to all the states, but we got to get this in the right hands of the people in order to get it looked at. That's the only way we're going to be able to implement these things throughout the United States of America. I was looking at the news about yesterday, and the young man on the says, well, President Trump wanted to challenge the 6 states, the main 6 states. And you know what that would do? It would disenfranchise about 10, maybe 20 million Black people. I was like, what does that have? Fraud has to do with Black people. Regardless of who's involved in the fraud, color has nothing to do with it. So I am fighting very hard. A fair system implemented in New York State, because I witnessed I know for a fact illegal aliens are voting our election. I get around, I talk, and they let me know that. They send ballots to illegal aliens in New York City, and they have reached out to me about this also. So it's a lot going on, fraudulent runs. And the only way to get it done, like Bill was saying, a convention of states, we need to do the convention of states. I think it's 30 or 33 states or something like that in order to get this done. But don't take my word out of context. But I'm gonna put it like I heard several people say, in order, like your buddy James Comer that's supposed to be in Gitmo, in order to get this country back on track, where it be the current government, the current ruling party got to be taken all the way down to ground zero. It got to be destroyed. That's the only way. Not violently destroyed, but I mean, we got to take them out of office. We got to fight hard. They got to be removed. The status quo, the ones that like Chuck Schumer for 30, 40, 50 years, that can't be allowed. We need term limits. All our institutions are rotten to the core, not the leaders on the top. Like I hear a lot of people say, I speak truth. It is rotten from the top to the bottom. All of the institutions, that includes the FBI, the Department of Justice, and so forth. And I'm not afraid to say that. And I'm definitely fighting to get these practices enacted with integrity so we can restore the trust of the American people once again. So if I was governor of the state of New York, I would have Bill would be my right-hand man. We need to set an example for the rest of the states in the United States of America, so we can have fair and free elections.
Okay, so we've heard a lot. Thank you. And we have also some things in the chat room, which we'll be going to in a minute, but Diane wants to respond. I'm gonna let her to go first, and then we'll refer to some of the things that we have now in the chat room. Diane?
Yeah, well, I am actually very opposed to a convention of the states, because I think if the population can't get it together to even have a fair election, I have no idea what they would come up with. I'm not sure the people, the Federalist Papers, I think we're in kind of a cultural dark age. So we have an excellent constitution, and we're going to have to figure out how to create a movement that forces it to be enforced. And what's sort of coming into my mind here in terms of this election question is it's almost looks like we need something like the Montgomery bus boycott, where you have to go county by county and you're going to have to actually recruit people. You're going to have to get a movement to do this. And people are going to have to decide that it's actually sacred and precious. And I think that's part of the problem. People have been asleep at the switch. A lot of people are very upset now, but they're deciding to be hopeless or say it's not worth it or what can you do? Well, that's not true. Human history has demonstrated repeatedly. I mean, think about what Gandhi did to throw the British out of India, for God's sakes, or, you know, and the British are still there, much too much, but these things can be changed. And if we want, because I think, and particularly in a republic, the government works two ways. The government has to be worthy of the population, but the people have to be worthy of having that form of government. And the last thing I want to say is I thought the music of Biden, and I didn't watch the concert, I heard it was beautiful, but the idea of Lady Gaga and all this other crap, you know, it's no wonder we're having trouble having elections. And I have to say, having been there on January 6th, the music that President Trump had wasn't so hot either. And I think if we had a culture that were more elevated, there's dignified people cannot tolerate becoming a banana republic. So we're going to have to get our act together and actually defend our right, demonstrate that we deserve a government that we elect. And I think Derrick and I are going to have to put this challenge to the voters.
Okay, before we go back, I see Derrick wants to respond. He's going to let you respond here in a minute. Let me just let people know some of the things in the chat room, because you may also want to be responding to some of this. First of all, Steve Freeman had to get going. He wanted to thank everybody for hearing him. just so everybody knows. Now I'm just looking at the chat room, reading off. So Martha says, I agree with Steve about in-person voting. The only exception is expatriates like myself, but that is manageable. She also said the media should never call an election. So that was her. Then I don't know who this was, but somebody said democracy promotes mediocre people. Case in point, Mr. Biden, barely a C student is running our country. Okay, let's see. Tell the truth. This is, I don't know if it's from Jenny or not, I'm not sure. It says, jail for Comey may be coming. Comey definitely deserves it. I think it's up to us to make sure that happens, but it won't be automatic. Okay. And then Jared just said, hell yeah, fire everybody. All right. And then, you know, each state has to turn out its own corruption. You get the idea. So, all right. So Derrick had his hand up. So let's go to him. And then we'll come back and ask everybody else what they think. Derrick?
I just want to respond to Diane. I think the people are ready, and the people showed they are ready with somewhat with the things that were happening on January the 6th. People are fed up. I think the people are ready to come together. We must find a way to bring them together under one accord and keep the violence out. But I can see clearly that the people are fed up because they know their vote don't count. Their voices are not being heard. And they say, well, what else can we do? They have their feet on our neck. So when you put your feet on somebody's neck, there's nothing else for them to do but punch back. And that is what's happening in the country. But we got to channel that energy into the legal way doing things, and besides trying to just force, do bloodshed, do destruction of our properties. But you can clearly see that people are ready, even with the conventional state. I believe if more people educate about it, it will really work out well with conventional states doing this. But I don't know what other way we can try to draw the masses together at this point, but we need to do it right away while the energy is high. Everybody's upset about the government, period. Republicans or Democrats. The fruit is ripe to come up with some kind of way to demand that things turn the other way. So that's all I want my input back to Diane on that.
I want to say one other thing, which I just remembered. See, in order for them to do, speaking on this culture question, for them to be able to pull off this magnitude of fraud, do you realize how many people in this country went along with it? A huge number of people. You couldn't do this with a handful of people. So we have a whole bunch of Americans who frankly think it's okay to be a crook, a liar, a cheat. And that's that is a question of our moral fitness to survive. I can't believe we don't have a few people who are broken by now who say, look, let me tell you what I know about this thing because it's on my conscience. That to me is a little shocking that we don't have people who say, you know, I know we have some, but there's some people who know an enormous amount and something's got to give in their soul or they're going to burn it. Yes, go ahead.
I see Bill's in this. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, just to add what Diane was saying, it was the 6 states that almost simultaneously shut down, stopped counting, threw everybody out, and then after that started counting again. One of them was photographed, and I saw the video in Georgia where they were counting the mail-in ballots. After they threw everybody out, the guy who was seen to be in the center of it all in an orange shirt got on the phone and called somebody. Then he hung up, and then they pulled all the ballots out from under the table and they started shoving them through the ballot counting box, right? And then at the end of it, when they were getting ready to leave, just as they were leaving, he got back on the phone. That phone call, NSA's got a copy of it. That phone call tells you who was he contacting when they were throwing them out, getting ready to do the ballot stuffing counting operation. And then at the end of it, he was calling somebody to say, we're through. That will get them into the entire network of coordinating the conspiracy across multi-states. That's a federal crime. Cross-state conspiracy to defraud people of their votes. There's a simple way to get to it. NSA's got the key. All they have to do it. Did Nakasone do that? Director of NSA? No. Why didn't he? What's the matter with him? Isn't he going to protect and defend the Constitution to live up by his oath of office? Come on, you know? Anyway, I just wanted to add that.
Okay, well, that's good. Lynn, I don't know if you have anything at this point.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that one thing people can do, and this is something I spoke of the last time, is some sort of open voting, do a public vote, and particularly for small towns, so that you would just simply like sign a petition or, you know, sign a register saying who you voted for. And then, you know, then when the fake election results come out, even if you have just a percentage of the voters, it can make a big difference. And we did do this in the past. We called them parallel elections. So there are things that people can do. And I do think that they have been caught red-handed, but we have a Department of Justice and FBI that and other law enforcement agencies that will sit on it, judges that will sit on it. So this is really something that the people themselves have to initiate, because our leadership, as we've said this evening, is completely corrupt.
I think you can look at something also. Look at it this way. You have 50 states and you're about 3,000 plus counties. So you look at it on the one hand, a small number of locations, then look at a large number of locations. All right, now, what we want to look for, it seems to me, is to say, any area where we can get, particularly in any given county area, where we could actually get a collaboration among small towns, doing exactly the kind of thing you said, but in any places where people are really ready to move, the key thing is, as we've been saying, rage against the machine. No machine voting. Just bam, you simply say you won't do it. It's like a boycott. That's the way you do it. I mean, Diane mentioned that before. You know, Montgomery bus boycott. Yeah, well, you can do this. Why? You know, we just say, well, we're not going to vote on the machine. That's it. You know, and so now obviously that will work better in a small town circumstance. But suppose you do that anywhere in America, let's say 10, 15 places. Once you do it, once you state you're going to do it, in fact, you're going to find, right, all of a sudden you're going to be able to get that process going, because the thing that you just said, Lynn, which is true, which is you're not going to get it from the officials. It's never going to occur. Steve also said that. But if you begin this process so that you can channel what we're talking about, because again, what Derrick said has to be taken into consideration, that there is a level of people, not just distrust, but anger about this, that you have got to channel in some nonviolent way, but it's also effective. See, people aren't going to just be nonviolent. They think it's going to work, right? They do something that's going to actually work. And then that would actually be, I think, possible.
Well, also to emphasize that the secret ballot, basically we're talking about open voting. The secret ballot was not adopted until the 1880s. So before then, people did vote openly, and that was a safeguard against fraud, because everyone knew how everyone was voting. Now, you know, when they introduced the secret ballot, they basically convinced everyone that they needed protection. And what that did was that created an anonymous, unverifiable ballot. So I think if we re-educate the public and ask them to, they need to start putting their John Hancock on their ballot, because we need to, what I call, sign up and be counted. That's what we have to do. People have to get brave about that. And I think with the open voting, that will initiate actual public discourse about a variety of political issues. This secret ballot has really been had a chilling effect on political discourse in our families, in our neighborhoods, everywhere. So I think people need to think about that and rediscover open voting.
Well, what I would certainly say is that tonight's conversation is bringing up a lot of things I'm sure people haven't thought about at all. And I think that's the really important element of this. Diane, you have anything you want to say at this point?
Just, I want to continue this conversation, because I think we should look for areas that we can do this. We should find some municipalities where they're willing to have a public ballot. We should find some people who are willing to have this rage against the machine idea. I think that it could really catch on like wildfire because, I mean, what do we have if we don't have the right to vote in this nation?
We have exactly what we have in Washington right now. We have-
Right.
Yeah. Well, this is pretty good. So I guess maybe this is a good place to conclude. It's also exactly an hour. I mean, this is really, I think, the beginning of something. And I would certainly thank everybody for what you've said.
Wait,
Also,
does Bill have, Bill has something else.
Go
Good.
ahead, Bill.
I just wanted to add this comment. What happened in Washington at Inauguration Day clearly showed that we have a government that's afraid of its people. Now, that gets back to what Reagan said originally, and I've said this before with the LaRouche group in different forums. Reagan said we are a country with a government, but now we're a government with a country. The people know it now, and the government's afraid of them.
We should, I think there's something just should be said. You know, on Monday, we had a video which featured Reverend James Bevel. He was the person who originated the Children's March in Birmingham. And he was the director of direct action for Martin Luther King. Now, what people didn't know was that Bevel was a lifelong Republican. Sort of a funny story, right? Because you figure, civil rights marches, no, Bevel was a lifelong Republican. And this is this idea he had in 1993. He said, you know, I'm not convinced that most of the people in the United States actually agree with the Declaration of Independence. So I think what we should organize are Declaration of Independence co-signer conventions. His point was, if they actually read it and you read the document aloud, do people agree enough to go and show up and put their signature on the document? So that's what we did. We did it in Philadelphia, actually. We just made up various forms of the Declaration. We had it read, and then people participated in this way. Now, it had a very interesting effect on people because actually it was true. A lot of people did not know what it said, and their participation in this way, we had about 500 people roughly involved in the process. And what we're talking about here tonight, in one sense, at least metaphorically, is that people have to return to that kind of idea. It's a republic if you can keep it, but you have to know what a republic is. And you have to participate in it because it's not just a question of your rights, it's your duties, it's your responsibilities to the republic. So I think this is this is definitely the kind of, and the character of conversation that needs to be happening all over America. I want to thank all of you for being on with us. It's Derrick Gibson, that's Lynn Landis, Bill Binney, Steve Freeman, and of course, Diane Sayre, whose show this is. And I'm Dennis Speed, and we're going to see you again next week. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.